to start with Mr. Lake. But first, I want to welcome you back to Two Way after you unmute and thank you for being part of what we do here.
Oh, I mean, what a great intro. Thank you so much. And I love two way. And I know you just brought on a great friend of mine, Michael Moynihan, who is terrific. And it's a great
He's,
platform. And I love
thank you.
what you're doing with it. It is kind of just it's taking the bitter emotions, the kind of partisan blindness out of politics. And it's like the country really needs it. So I really appreciate what you do, Mark.
Thank you, sir. Very kind of you. Eli Lake writes for the Free Press. Barry Weiss's operation has a bunch of great people, including Eli. My friend Neil Ferguson writes there, another
He's
brilliant guy.
he's great.
And uh, Nellie Bowles' Friday column is a laugh a minute or more, maybe three laughs a minute. And Eli, you also host Breaking History podcast. Tell folks what that's about and where they can read it or listen
Well, the
to it, rather.
Breaking History podcast is through the Free Press. And what we do is every other week, we have a very tight 40 to 50 minute narrative podcast where we bring in real experts and journalists and historians, and we look at something that is in the news conversation, and we then also and then we tell a story that we feel from history that helps illuminate that. And the kind of idea is like, well, there's very few things that are totally new and unprecedented. So usually we've been here before. Our first one was called Trump's Populist Moment, and it was about the rise of Andrew Jackson, who was our first populist president. And the latest one, which I'm really proud of, is the story of Luigi Mangione and how he has been celebrated by many Americans, even though it appears that at least he is alleged to have murdered Brian Thompson by shooting him in the back. And we compare his story to another person who, pardon the expression, was as part of the phenomenon of breaking rad, Ulrike Meinhof, who was a really prominent West German journalist, an important journalist, and she ended up kind of helping to form her own terrorist group and became West Germany's most notorious terrorist. And so that's the episode. I recommend it. I write the script. I write my own AI songs for it, including the interstitial music, and we have great guests. And we could use your support, so please check it out and subscribe.
What day does it drop?
Every other Wednesday. The latest one came out on this Wednesday. The next one will be in about a week and a half.
All right. And is there a way for people to sign up to get notifications to know when it's going to come out and who's on?
Well, if you sign up for the free press, that's actually a very good idea that we should maybe tell people what's coming. That's noted. We don't do that yet. We just started, but if you sign up for the free press, you'll be able to find out this, when it comes out, and if you get it, we're on Apple, Spotify, and all the major platforms.
Eli also has a hyper sophisticated X game. I recommend you
I'll
follow
try
him.
it.
Follow him there if you don't. All right. I want to start. The president talked at the White House today. He did an event with the Secretary of Defense, and he talked on all manners of topics, and we'll get to that probably, maybe not. I want to start with two related stories that just have me gobsmacked, and
Mm,
it takes a lot to surprise me. Anything related to Donald Trump, but the bending of the knee by Columbia University, which is breaking tonight after long conversations. It's been long forecast that Columbia was going to give in to the demands of the president to change their policies in a range of ways in order to keep their federal funding. There you see the Wall Street Journal headline. Um, but also a story we discussed at some length this morning on the morning meeting, which is Paul Weiss, the law firm. Also, these are two private entities, one that receives a great deal of federal funding, and I think that's where they were threatened. One who clearly felt that the president could use his leverage to destroy the law firm, both giving in. Now, it'll be interesting to see what other universities do, what other white shoe law firms do. And there's no doubt that the analysis of her by Republicans that those kinds of entities, major universities and white shoe law firms, have been a huge political benefit to the left, and that they, in the case of the law firms and the president's view correctly, helped to try to send him to prison. I just love you to talk about if you agree with me that this is a huge deal symbolically, that and it's a shocking turn, that has implications for our society. I just love you to put in perspective, historical perspective and political, societal perspective. How big a deal do you think these two things are and why?
Well, I think Colombia is enormous. There has been kind of a slow motion, you could say, radicalization of some of these departments at these universities. I think there was a real double standard that was exposed after October 7th. Every group gets to say, this speech is making me feel unsafe. And that is enough for the school to shut it down, except for Jews after October 7th. That I think revealed a total, that was a disgrace. And there was a process. There were like serious lawsuits. The Department of Education under Biden, to credit him, had begun investigations. So there were things, but it wasn't really moving. And then Trump did something that no other president has done, which is to threaten hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding. And he basically gets results. And some of this is common sense stuff. But I would argue, I mean, in some ways, I don't, let's be realistic. That's not a great precedent because, well, I don't know. What if there's a Democratic president in 4 years or 8 years or wherever? And then they decide that they have a set of policy issues, and then they try to play the same card with the university. That's probably not a great situation. You don't necessarily want to say that, but I would also say that things had gone in one direction at Columbia and a lot of these elite schools for so long that I would say extraordinary action is necessary. And that's why I don't really have a problem with it. Whereas if you just asked me in the abstract, I would. On this Paul White thing, I guess in some ways, I totally agree. These white shoe law firms had kind of become very beneficial for the Democrats historically. The trial lawyers are supportive of that. I'm I don't like the idea of kind of individually targeting a law firm, even when I disagree with them. I think that I'm going to forget the name of the law, but it's like you can't pass a law in Congress that targets just an individual. Again, every norm violated last time by the Democrats in terms of going after the leader of the opposition party or a former president is an invitation to violate norms coming up. And this time, every norm violated by Trump, it's not going to be 100 years of Republicans. That's not how our country works. There is eventually going to be a counter reaction. And so that's why the rules that we all agree on kind of that's the incentive for keeping them in place. So in the case of Colombia, I'm not shedding any tears. In the other case, I think it sets a bit of a dangerous precedent. And you have to sort of think, what if it's President AOC? And you've just introduced that toolbox to her. And I just don't see that question being asked by the Trump White House enough, which is to think more long term. What do you think?
So, so my colleague Dan Turntine
Yeah,
on the morning meeting said
yeah,
something that you said, which is, well, now Democrats not only might do this if they
mm-hmm.
when they retake the White House, but that it's going to be expected of Democratic presidential candidates to announce that they're if they get back in power, they will turn the tables. And the question I asked Dan is the question I'll ask you. What would a president, what kind of institutions would a president AOC target? Because the University of Alabama, not as liberal as Columbia, but it's no friend of the Republican Party in terms
Sure.
of so the faculty and et cetera. So what are the institutions? Because I'll tell you that embedded in my question, just in case it's not clear, is this is an asymmetry. There aren't institutions like that on the right that have been a bulwark of the right as compared to the universities, the law firms, the media, the Hollywood talent agencies, the Silicon Valley companies, the CEOs of major corporations. Now they could go after the Coke Industries. They could, but there aren't broad categories of companies or of organizations that are like the ones on the left that I see.
What
Am I
about
wrong?
Fox News? What about the Heritage Foundation? I mean, you can come up with people, you can come up with things. What I mean, or just if you look at it, I mean, first of all, we're in the middle of a lot of change at this point and flux and so forth. So you could say, well, what are the institutions that they're going to go after? But they will find a way to kind of normalize the idea of there's certainly law firms that work with Republicans. Why can't they do that? Why can't they do the same thing? Now, the argument on the other side is Democratic and Republican presidents used to do it. They just didn't put it in an executive order. So it was an understood, this firm is persona non grata because you represented this guy that we didn't like, and that's life in the big city. Um, but I don't know. I do think that it's a lot of power to put into the hands. There is a precedent here. It's not coming out of nowhere. That's where you and I think agree. Um, I think that this White House is responding to a lot of norm violations from the Biden years, and
Yeah.
when he was president the first time,
Yeah.
and that's why they're cleaning house, as it were. But
Yeah.
just
What's
be careful.
what's remarkable to me is our colleagues in the so-called dominant media, mainstream media, they won't even point out that this is a reaction to some extent to what went on, not just in the Biden years, but went on for decades.
Yeah,
And particularly in the last 4 years in targeting of Donald Trump. I mean, it doesn't justify what Donald Trump is doing, but if you're trying to be fair to voters and explain it, they barely will have a half paragraph pointing out the reasons all these things are being
yeah,
done. They're not made up. They're a reaction to specific things. If I were someone who a lawyer had tried to put me in prison and I had the power to try to push back on that, it's a pretty good chance I would.